Hello and welcome to number 2. Today we're just going to have a quick chat about the background info of Winton, and then I'm going to go through some of the major plot points with you. There'll be lots of information on the slides and I'm not going to read them to you because you're not children, but these PowerPoints will also be online, so you can have a read through them yourself. It kind of goes through each section of the book and just lists what the major plot points are in each section and breaks it up, okay? Alright, now in terms of Tim Winton, here's some information on him. He was born in the 60s. He's from Western Australia, which is why a lot of his writing actually centres on Western Australia. He's written short stories and novels, both for young people and adults. If you haven't, you should definitely read Lockie Leonard. It's one of those great coming-of-age books. I read it when I was a teenager and I loved it. It's also been turned into an ABC TV program, which is worth a look. And one of his recent books, The Turning, has also been turned into a very well-known film adaptation. The Turning was on a VCE list, as was A Minimum of Two, which is a selection of short stories. So Winton's actually been on the VCE list for a while, and it's because he has lots of great themes and is an Australian writer that they think that he's worth studying. He's often considered to have a strong, unique voice with respect to Australian identity, as well as a lyrical writing style and sometimes mystical perspective. Winton is also an active environmentalist. That basically means that he writes unlike many other people. He uses a lot of words, and the way he writes it can be really beautiful to read. His combination of words, even his sentence structure and things like that, can be really unusual and is really interesting. This mystical perspective is actually really interesting as well. So often what happens in his books doesn't necessarily make sense, and if you've got up to it, one part in particular that I still doesn't make sense, I don't think it will ever make sense, is when Quick starts to glow after his time in the country. Like, I don't know why as a character he would start to glow, but that's just something that Winton thought was important to happen. And I'm sure we'll be able to unpack that as a class. And something that's actually not listed here, not mentioned here, is that Winton is actually a Christian. So it's really interesting he doesn't actually portray Christians in necessarily a positive light. So obviously the Lamb family in Cloud Street are, the token fundamentalists, but he doesn't necessarily give them a positive storyline. And I think that's really interesting that we have a Christian writer who is able to write about about Christian experiences with almost a raw kind of sensitivity. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And obviously the fact that he's an active environmentalist is worth mentioning, because just the way he writes about landscape and his ability to communicate the importance of landscape, I think is really a unique part of his writing, and you definitely see that in Cloud Street as well. He's won lots of different awards, either for the Booker Prize, the Vogel, or the Miles Franklin Awards. There, if you like reading, jump online and look for other Booker Prize winners or other Miles Franklin Award winners and start ticking through the list, because there are some great authors on those lists. Cloud Street was first published in 1991, and straight away it was recognised as a modern Australian classic. I think this was because the families that he portrays, people were really able to relate to, either in their own experience or in the experience of others. It won lots of awards, as you can see. But it was just recognised as a great story from the outset. A little bit weird, obviously, as well. If you've read it, you'll understand that. But, yeah, just really good story. It's been adapted into a TV miniseries, which I can highly recommend as well. I think it's like 3 parts all in all. It does a really good job of kind of portraying the more mystical, supernatural aspects of the book. So it does a really good job of helping you think about the fact that the house, Cloud Street, the house, is its own kind of character, but you need to watch it as well as read it. You can't just watch it, because there's actually heaps of things that are different. So it's good to help you think about characterization, but it's not so great if you're only going to look at it, because the plot is different. Okay, moving on to plot. As this quote says, Cloud Street has a meandering plot, which means that it wanders through lots of different things. There's no real one storyline that's you know, central and happens in all of the chapters. I like to think of Cloud Street as a little bit like Love Actually. So hopefully you've seen Love Actually, great film. But it's got lots of different storylines, each kind of independent of each other, yet at the same time they're all woven together in some way. Okay? The difference here is that in Love Actually, obviously everything has a really nice, neat ending, and we find out how everything's connected and all the characters have played an important part. In Cloud Street, we have a central theme, we have a central story, but we have characters coming in and coming out that aren't actually that connected to the main narrative, okay? So as it says there in that bottom paragraph, the central narrative is the family's eventual discovery of a sense of place, family, community, and peace, involving the coming together of two families through the marriage, spoiler alert, marriage of Rose and Quick, and Fisher's eventual achievement of his longing to return to the water. So basically it is a narrative about two families figuring out how on earth they're going to function on this world. But we do have some characters that come in and out that's their narratives, their individual stories aren't actually that important. And we also have stories that aren't finished. So in Love Actually, every story's finished, right? But in Cloud Street, we have loose ends. So that is, I think, what makes this a really unique and interesting book to read. Some of the departures from the central narrative are the inclusion of events and mini-narratives, which is like a little subplot, which seem unrelated or whose connection to the central narrative is minimal, tangential, non-existent, or hard to discern. Basically, we can't quite figure out why it's there or why Winton has thought it was important. I actually think some of the things that he includes are just great opportunities for him to experiment with other characterization and to experiment with other forms of writing. I think we'd be naive to think that Winton hasn't just written some things for his own enjoyment or for his own experimentation. I think all writers do that. And I think in some cases, Winton has included things because he wanted to, and that we actually don't have to figure out the meaning of everything. That can be a good part about a book as well. And yeah, there's a list of some of the few things there which are not quite that relevant to that main narrative of the families figuring out their place. And I really like that second dot point there, where the ups and downs of Sam's success at gambling appear to follow no discernible pattern. So we might think that Sam will have a good gambling experience, if there is such a thing, right before the family's about to experience an up, and vice versa, a bad experience before they experience a down. But it doesn't necessarily fit like that. And I think that that's a really good indication of Winton's kind of the theory that he's trying to express here, that actually life doesn't always turn out the way we want it to, and that there's not necessarily, you know, a meaning behind all the little actions that we have. And I think basically this plot comment quote here sums up what I have been trying to say very eloquently. The effect of these, these being the subplots and the tangents and all those sorts of things, is that the novel offers a view of experience which accepts the incoherence of much human experience, incoherence meaning it doesn't actually make sense, and a lack of belief that life always follows a clear pattern. Thus, the novel can be seen to validate a working class view of experience where one isn't always in control of life, but subject to the ebb and flow. It can also be seen to offer a postmodernist outlook on life which rejects coherent and systematic narratives as the most appropriate reflection of human experience. That last sentence is basically saying this is a new way of looking of telling life stories. So if you've read books that tell stories of people's lives, everything kind of makes sense. Winton here is suggesting to us that if we tell a life story that accurately portrays life, it won't always make sense. It won't always follow a linear structure. It won't always work out the way we expect it to, and we won't always have the reasons why things happen. I think he does a really good job actually of not explaining things, and as readers we just have to deal with that. We have to go, well, I don't know why that happens, but that's part of reading this book. And I think the important thing to think about is why he's done that and what effect that has on us as readers, and that's what we'll get to in class. Alright, the next few slides are going to go through the plot points of each stage, and I really don't want to waste your time by reading this to you, so we'll just have a flick through. So you can see that the main storyline spans from 1943 to 64. So We see there when Lester's born, blah, blah, blah. You can read that yourself. We're not really told about the construction of the house itself, but we're told a little bit about what happens in the house, and you can see that the impact that that has on the two families when they move in, the fact that they know that the house has a history. The main narrative does follow two families, the Pickles and the Lambs. Both are from out of Perth and come together in Perth, and then the story very loosely follows the process of their coming together. Both are working class families who struggle with poverty. We talked about the context of poverty at this time. So it starts off with an untitled opening. It gets straight into a narrative that can be a little bit disconcerting from the beginning. We have to try and figure out who this narrator is. They don't refer to themselves, or they refer to themselves as a few different things. It's first person narrative and third person narrative at this stage. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in class. And then we get into part 1 and 2, both of which involve disasters for the individual families. So the families haven't met yet, but we have part 1 and part 2 involving disasters for them. Part 3 brings both families together in the house. Part 4, we see general unease in the characters. They're going through transitions, and they all have negative experiences. So there's unease in the house and in our characters. Part 5, we see some escape starting to happen. So they're trying to escape the previous unease through different measures. Okay, you can read those there. Part 6 is really all about Quick, and it's just all about his experience of going to the land. And so part 6 is really dedicated to Quick and his experiences. Part 7 follows that part through when he returns to Cloud Street after the weird glowing section. And we see how his family deal with that. Part 8 is Rose having her affair and then kind of things coming together a little bit. So Quick and Rose get together, get married, etc. Then we see there's the pressure and the relief. So things start to get better in part 9. I really like that quote down at the bottom where it's the house actually breathes its first painless breath in half a century with the birth of the two families meeting together in Wax Harry, their child. I really love that idea that the house itself is breathing its first breath with the birth of the new baby as well. And then we have part 10, the waiting, where we kind of ends are starting to be tied off a little bit, and then the untitled ending. So the beginning actually fits in after part 10 and before the untitled ending. So that's the plot narrative, the narrative plot rather. I'm not going to read all that to you. You can figure that out for yourselves. Have a look at the PowerPoint online. It will be good for you to read it, but I'm not going to waste your time reading it to you. Okay, thank you.